Jagurya. We sit in a comfortable meditation posture. Close the eyes. Put your attention on the silence that is always there deep in the mind. Connect with that silence. Become the silence. You are the silent witness. Now listen with the sense of the silent witness as I read the Yoga Vashishta. Book 3, Chapter 113. Continuing with verse 56. Rama said, "It is wonderful that a false conception that has no real existence and is so delicate as almost a nothing, but with a name, should blind the understanding. It is strange that something without form or figure, without sense or understanding, and which is unreal and vanishing, should so blindfold the world. It is strange that a thing sparkling in darkness and vanishing in daylight and short-sighted as the brooding owl should keep the world in darkness. It is strange that something prone to doing evil and unable to come to light and flying from sight and having no bodily form whatever should thus darken the world. It is a wonder that one acting so miserly and consorting with the mean and vile, and ever hiding herself in darkness, should thus dominate the world. It is wonderful that fallacy attended with constant sorrow and peril, and which is devoid of sense and knowledge, should keep the world in dark. It is to be wondered that error arising from anger and greed, creeping crookedly in darkness and liable to instant death, should keep the world in blindness. It is surprising that error, which is a blind, dull, and stupid thing itself, and which is falsely talkative at all times, should yet mislead others in the world. It is astonishing that falsehood should betray a man after attaching as closely to him as his consort and showing all her endearments to him, but flying at the approach of his reason. It is strange that a man should be blinded by the womanish attire of error, which beguiles the man but dares not to look at him face to face. It is strange that man is blinded by his faithless consort of error, which has no sense or intelligence and which dies away without being killed. Tell me, sage, how this error, which has its seat in the desires and is deeply rooted in the recesses of the heart and mind, and leads us to the channels of endless misery by subjecting us to the repeated births and deaths and to the pains and pleasures of life, is to be dispelled. Chapter 114, Description of Error. Ram repeated, tell me, sage, how to remove this stony blindness of man caused by the trick of ignorance of it. Vasishtha replied, as the particles of snow melt at the sight of sun, so this ignorance is dispelled immediately by a glance of the Supreme Spirit. Until then, ignorance continues to hurl down the soul and spirit as from a precipice to the depths of the world, and expose them to sorrows as thick as thorny brambles. As long as the desire of seeing spirit does not arise of itself in the human soul, there is no end to this ignorance of vidya and unconsciousness. The sight of the Supreme Spirit destroys the knowledge of our self-existence. That is caused by our ignorance. Just like the light of the sun destroys the shadows of things. The sight of the all-pervading God dispels our ignorance in the same manner as the light of the 12 zodiacal suns, all shining at once, puts the shadows of night to flight from all sides of the horizon. So, of course, what Vasishta is speaking about here with his words, the glance of the Supreme Spirit, sight of the Supreme Spirit, sight of the all-pervading God. He's talking about the silent witness. The silent witness, of course, has 5 senses when it is operating within the relative sphere, where we can first contact it. These are the pratibha senses. You're now listening to this reading with your silent witness sense of hearing. This is not a sense connected with any of your koshas. This is a sense of hearing that is literally the sense of hearing of Krishna. Continuing with verse 7. Our desires are the offsprings of our ignorance, and the annihilation of these constitutes what we call our liberation. A man who is devoid of desires is reckoned the perfect and consummate master, Siddha. As the night shade of desires is dissipated from the region of the mind, the darkness of ignorance is put to flight by the rise of the intellectual sun. As the dark night flies away before the advance of sunlight, so ignorance disappears before the advance of true knowledge, viveka, or discrimination. The stiffness of our desires tends to bind the mind fast in its worldly chains. Like the advance of night serves to increase the fear of demons in children. Ram asks, the knowledge of phenomena as true makes what we call avidya, or ignorance, and is said to be dispersed by spiritual knowledge. Now tell me, sage, what is the nature of the spirit? Vasishta replied, that which is not the subject of thought which is all pervasive, and the thought of which is beyond expression and comprehension, is the universal spirit. That which reaches to the highest heaven of God and stretches over the lowest plots of grass on earth is the all-pervading spirit at all times, and is unknown to the ignorant soul. All this is truly Brahman, eternal and imperishable consciousness. To him, no imagination of the mind can reach at any time. So what Vasishtha is saying here is that in order to connect with the silent witness, we cannot use the mind. The silent witness is beyond the mind. We have to literally let go of the mind completely. Now, it's one thing to desire to let go of the mind, intend to let go of the mind. But it's another to actually accomplish that. In the books of Carlos Castaneda, there is a metaphor used by Don Juan, the teacher of Carlos, where he tells Carlos that he must leap off into the abyss. That is literally what we must do. To connect with the silent witness, we have to go someplace that is completely away from the mind. We have to leave the mind totally behind. In order to do that, the mind has to release us. We are captured by the mind. The mind is like a cage that keeps us confined. This cage is made of individual karmic traces. But we're doing it first is at least looking out through the bars of the cage. We're connecting with the silent witness that is always there. As if we're in a cage, and outside the cage is beautiful sunshine. But the bars of the cage are very thick, And we can only see the sunshine through a tiny hole between the karmic traces. So at first, our strategy is find that tiny hole, look through it and see the sunshine of the silent witness. And then intellectually understand. I am that silent witness. And then if we can let go completely of the mind and reduce ourself to a point of consciousness, we can fly through that tiny hole in the karmic trace cage that surrounds us. And become free of the individual karmic traces. We can transcend them. We can go beyond them. And when we do, we find ourselves able to observe the karmic traces as the silent witness. And this is the second thing that Don Juan told Carlos. When you jump off into the abyss, you have to reassemble yourself before you hit the bottom. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're jumping off into the abyss. We're leaving the mind, taking our awareness into pure consciousness, unbounded, pure being with no limitations, with no boundaries. And then we're gathering ourselves again as the silent witness. We're finding our prativa senses so that we're not simply completely blind. We reassemble ourselves as pure, unbounded consciousness, able to perceive from that vantage point of the silent witness. Verse 15. That which is never born or dead, and which is ever existent in all worlds, and in which the conditions of beings and change are altogether wanting, which is one and one alone, all and all pervading, and imperishable unity, which is incomprehensible in thought, and is only of the form of intellect, is the universal spirit. It is accompanied with the ever-existent, all extending, pure and undisturbed consciousness, and is that calm, quiet, even an unchanging state of the soul, which is called the divine spirit. Jai Gurudev. Thank you all for attending.